Hello, you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, the weekly Torah portion podcast where I read the weekly Torah portion and then provide my own interpretation on what I think the text means. This week, we are looking at Parashat Kedoshim, falling on the 3rd of Iyar, 5784, May 11th, 2024. The meaning of Kedoshim is holy ones, right? So Kedosh, and then Kedoshim, the plural. So, with that said, we're going to be jumping straight in with chapter 19, verse 1 of Leviticus. If you want to read along in English, you can do so on Chabad.org. And before we begin, I'd like to remind everybody once again, I am not a professional Torah scholar, just somebody who wished to study the Torah. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 19, verse 1 of Leviticus. First portion. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Every man shall fear his mother and his father, and you shall observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. You shall not turn to the worthless idols, nor shall you make molten deities for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you slaughter a peace offering to the Lord, you shall slaughter it for your acceptance. It may be eaten on the day you slaughter it, and on the morrow, but anything left over until the third day shall be burned in fire. And if it would be eaten on the third day, it is abominable, it shall not be accepted. And whoever eats it shall bear his sin, because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from his people. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not fully reap the corner of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you collect the fallen individual grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal, you shall not deny falsely, you shall not lie, one man to his fellow. You shall not swear falsely by my name, thereby profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your fellow. You shall not rob. The hired worker's wage shall not remain with you overnight until morning. You shall not curse a deaf person. You shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person. And you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. All right, so there we have our first portion. So it's a very, very straightforward, I'd say, and simple portion to understand as far as what the rules are, right? You are being told here what you can and cannot do, a list of things. The most interesting to me are a few of these, right? So whether or not you make a sacrifice and when you can eat of it, you can eat of it the day it's sacrificed and the next day, but after that third day, it's considered abominable, right? And it will no longer be accepted. So interesting. What makes it impure? Well, when we think about it, right, if you slaughter an animal, it becomes a dead thing. Right. Now, there are other commandments related to things like whether or not you can eat the carcass of an animal. No, it makes you impure until sundown, right? So this would essentially be if you kill an animal for sacrifice and then you hold it for too long, it goes from being a holy thing to now an unclean, abominable thing. So that might be the rationale there. Of course, we're trying to interpret God's will, right? So what does this really mean? And whoever eats it shall bear his sin because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord, right? So there you go. Now, another thing, right? This is similar to previous portions mentioning this, but when you take your harvest of the field, don't take the corners and also whatever, I guess the gleanings, the things that kind of fall to the side, leave them for the poor. Very good. Now we have those basic ones that are in the 10, right? Do not steal, do not deny falsely, you shall not lie. So there you go. Lying is really bad. Don't swear falsely by my name. So that's super bad, right? Because you'll profane the name of God. Death penalty, by the way. You shall not oppress your fellow. You shall not rob, right? So it's one thing to steal, but oppressing and robbing are a different matter. I think in that case, you're exerting force on a person. And robbing him is like, it's one thing to take something, but it's another to take it from him directly, right? Because there are different entirely experiences. Right? Somebody who's caught in the middle of the night stealing, he can be killed, right? But if he steals and then returns it later, then doesn't get caught, it can be redeemed. So the situation here, talking about robbing someone versus stealing, I think there's a distinction to be made because robbing is like when the person has it on their person and you say, give me what you got. That's robbing. That's violent. Lastly, on verse 13, the hired worker's wage shall not remain with you overnight until morning. Now, this one's extremely important in my opinion. And if you've ever worked for somebody who's held your wages, right, you're supposed to be paid on payday. Let's say it's Friday's payday, and the day goes by and the money never shows up. And what's the deal? So it specifically says the worker's wage shall not remain with you, right? So it doesn't mean I owe somebody their payday, but I don't have the money. Then I'm not holding it with me, right? So in other words, if we're working and we do get paid, or the owner of the business gets the money and doesn't pay the employee, but he has the money to do so, that's where he's breaking the rule. If he doesn't have the money, like they do the job, and it turns out that the money doesn't come through, then it's not breaking this particular commandment. So as long as you don't hold it and keep it for yourself, in other words, pay your employees, pay the people that work for you, and do so on time. Otherwise, you are breaking the commandments. Number 14, you shall not curse a deaf person, and you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind. And you shall fear your God, I am the Lord. Right, so these two, cursing a deaf person and a stumbling block before the blind. So it's interesting because we can interpret this literally, but this is more than just a literal statement. To curse a deaf person means to do something like this where they can't hear it. But a deaf person isn't always someone who's literally deaf. Similarly, you shall not place a stumbling block before a blind person, someone who can't see where they're going, and then you cause them to trip. In other words, don't lead someone down a path where they can't see what's about to happen to them. This happens a lot of times in a lot of different ways. We could even go back to the marriage of, when you were looking at the marriage of Jacob with Leah instead of Rachel, right? That was a stumbling block before the blind because he couldn't see her face, and she was swapped with the woman he was supposed to marry. So that would be considered a stumbling block before the blind in another version of blindness, right? Someone who can't see. Another one, Isaac. Well, Isaac couldn't see. His vision had gone from him, and he was deceived by Jacob, right? Look at that, karmic justice, right? But point is, don't do that to a blind person, but also not literally a blind person, someone who cannot see what they're getting themselves into. Don't put something before them. It's just wrong. It's morally and spiritually wrong, and it is commanded, don't do it. All right, second portion, chapter 19, verse 15 of Leviticus. You shall commit no injustice in judgment. You shall not favor a poor person or respect a great man. You shall judge your fellow with righteousness. You shall not go around as a gossip monger amidst your people. You shall not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your fellow, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. You shall neither take revenge from nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall observe my statutes. You shall not crossbreed your livestock with different species. You shall not sow your field with a mixture of seeds, and a garment which has a mixture of shatnets shall not come upon you. If a man lies carnally with a woman, and she is a handmaid designated for a man, and she had not been fully redeemed, nor had her document of emancipation been granted her, there shall be an investigation. They shall not be put to death because she had not been completely freed. He shall bring his guilt offering to the Lord, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, a guilt offering ram. And the Kohen shall effect atonement for him with the guilt offering ram before the Lord for the sin that he had committed, and he shall be forgiven for the sin that he had committed. All right, so here we get into some matters of justice. The first is, of course, when you're being a judge, and this is the second portion once again, you shall not favor a poor person or respect a great man. In other words, all judgments should be done according to the law, not according to the person. Don't take pity on the guy for breaking the rules because he has a different set of circumstances, right? Don't show him favor because of the fact that he's poor. He still broke the law. That's one of those things that a person with a compassionate heart might say, well, he stole bread, but he was poor, right? So it's considered something like this. Don't favor a poor person or respect. Well, yes, he did this horrible thing, but look how important he is. He's a great man in this community. Therefore, we should be lenient on him. Similar situation, judge with righteousness. So that one's definitely one I think that's tough on people, but that's why judges are supposed to be considered to be truly judge with fairness and even-handedness, right? No one greater than the other, no one less than the other. right? The one law for the stranger and the citizen. Anyway, gossip mongering, lashon hara, right? That's the evil tongue, right? But don't be a gossip monger. Very bad. Don't speak about people behind their back. Don't gossip. That destroys communities, right? Very important. So this one's probably one of the most important because it's one of the easiest to do. So don't do it. Also, don't stand by in the shedding of your fellow's blood. I am the Lord. So if somebody's being killed, right, we think of Moses when he saved the Hebrew from the taskmaster that was beating him. You could consider this to be an exoneration of the act when Moses killed the Egyptian that was beating him. Well, this is in line with the commandments that we'd later receive in the Torah. So, in other words, Moses, by stepping up and protecting that man, was making sure to not stand by the shedding of his fellow's blood. You shall not hate your brother, right? So, this is really, really important. Rebuke your fellow, but you shall not bear a sin on his account. So, it goes in both directions, right? So basically what it means to not hate somebody and to rebuke them but not bear sin, right? So in other words, on one hand, if he's doing something wrong, don't also do something wrong to get yourself a sin. But also, if he's doing something wrong, don't hate him. Instead, just tell him what you're doing is wrong. Okay? Very important. Now, on to the next one. Neither take revenge from nor bear a grudge against the members of your people. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Very much the key, right? So just there it is. Consider everyone with the same empathy and compassion that you would have for yourself. Now that can be a little bit of a double-edged sword because some people don't hold themselves to a nice standard that they are compassionate with themselves. They hold themselves to a really high bar. So you have to then you consider each person loving their neighbor as themselves might be kind of interesting because everyone's version of self-love and self-treatment is quite different. Now we have some further ones, right? Don't crossbreed livestock and don't sow your field with a mixture of seeds. And a garment which is a mixture of shatnez shall not come upon you. So getting the garment thing out, it's basically saying like stick with one type of fabric or textile, I suppose. But this one's really interesting, crossbreeding livestock and also sowing the field with a mixture of seeds. So the idea, I think here is we go back to the biblical context of what happened in the times before the flood. There were great abominations across the land. And there are all sorts of additional commentaries about, Adam having done things with different species, and I won't go into that. But the idea is Noah's Ark indicated that each animal brought onto the ark was after its own kind. So they were like purebred animals, right? And so don't go creating impure breeding. Don't crossbreed your livestock because that is not the way that they were made to be. Sowing the field with a mixture of seeds, interesting. So in other words, if you're growing corn, don't also grow watermelon in that same field. Keep it together, as in the same kind with itself. Now, this could be because it's not good for the animal or for the plant, but also it could just be that God doesn't want you to crossbreed different plant species. It's one way or the other, but I think we can stick with the whole purity perspective, right? This seems to be the reason for these things. We want to keep everything after its own kind. This is really where you get into some tricky territory when we see what sort of crossbreeding goes on with plants and animals. Now, here we have a talk about lying with a woman. If she is a handmaid designated for a man, and she had not been fully redeemed, nor had her document of emancipation been granted her, they're going to do an investigation, right? So think of it like this. If she is the man's servant and is not fully emancipated or redeemed, right? So what this means is she's not his wife. She's his servant. And then someone sleeps with her. Rather than this being considered the same as traditional adultery, there's going to be an investigation. But because she was not completely free, she's not recognized as equal as a normal freed woman. And so instead, the man is going to have to bring a guilt offering after the investigation is concluded, and that will redeem him. Very interesting. On to the third portion, chapter 19, verse 23. When you come to the land and you plant any food tree, you shall surely block its fruit from use. It shall be blocked from you from use for 3 years, not to be eaten. And in the 4th year, all its fruit shall be holy, a praise to the Lord. And in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit. Do this in order to increase its produce for you. I am the Lord your God. You shall not eat over the blood. You shall not act on the basis of omens or lucky hours. You shall not round off the corner of your head, and you shall not destroy the edge of your beard. You shall not make cuts in your flesh for a person who died. You shall not etch a tattoo on yourselves. I am the Lord. You shall not defile your daughter by making her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry, and the land be filled with immorality. You shall observe my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. You shall not turn to the sorcery of Ov or Yidoni. You shall not seek these and thereby defile yourselves through them. I am the Lord your God. You shall rise before a venerable person, and you shall respect the elderly, and you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. Thus concludes the third portion here. So, okay, let's once again break these down piece by piece. So first off, we talk about fruit trees. So basically, it's going to take you 4 years before you're allowed to touch the fruit. And by doing it this way, the first 3 years, think of the tree as like a child. You don't put the child to work, right? So those first 3 years, leave the fruit be. On the 4th year, it's holy, right? So consider it to be holy and a praise to the Lord. And then in the 5th year, that is when you may eat its fruit. And this will increase its produce for you. So in other words, we're being told the reasons, leave it alone, ultimately will benefit you the most, because at that point, it's going to be a fully grown tree. It's got 4 years of good, successful growing. On the 5th year now, it's healthy enough to produce the best quality crop. Next up, don't eat over the blood. We've talked about that. And also, don't act on the basis of omens or lucky hours. So if you've ever heard something like 11:11, make a wish, well, that's the basis of a lucky hour, isn't it? It also really would tie into, oh, I saw a shooting star. Time to play the lottery. That kind of thing. Don't act on those. Don't round off the corner of your head, and you shall not destroy the edge of your beard. So it's interesting here. This is kind of hard to interpret, right? What does it mean to round off the corner of your head or destroy the edge of your beard? So, I mean, this has a lot to do with personal grooming and hygiene, right? So, don't round. I think what this really means is don't shave your head, right? Or don't shave your head bald to round off the corner. Well, no, actually, that's not quite right, because we've seen the phrasing for shaving. So this is very specific. Now, in modern days, we've seen this interpreted by a number of people as being when they do like their peyot, which are the long curly sideburns, right? So maybe they consider that the corner. So don't cut around the corner. And we can maybe try to think about the head as like a crown, the corners of the head. Maybe it's saying that. And this is always kind of silly, but I've thought of it like this. When a person goes bald, typically if you look at the bald pattern, right, it seems to arc around the skull. And there ends up being like parts that, fit like up the sideburn that still stay there. So to me, that's probably what it's referring to. Destroying the edge of your beard is also interesting. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure how to interpret that, because what does it mean, the edge of the beard? Like, does it mean don't shave off your beard? Don't destroy the edge of your beard? Like, what does it mean to destroy a beard? I guess what it means is by the edge, does it refer to the end of it or where it begins? So maybe it's the edge growing out, or maybe it's the edge as in where it appears on your face. So you can keep a tight trim, but not all the way down to the root. Who knows? That's the hardest part. But, I think most people would understand the edge as being the longest part of the beard, which is why so many people grow a long beard. But I suppose it's fair to understand that the word is edge. This is in English. Maybe the Hebrew is more clear. Don't cut your flesh for a person who died. So, right, someone dies and you cut open you like make a cut into your leg or something to bleed. Don't do it. Also, don't tattoo yourself. Well, that one's fairly straightforward. Do not defile your daughter by making her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry. So this is relating to when people are poor in particular. You could see a lot of examples of this throughout human history. In a good example in Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, right? The daughter that of the man that is in the story, right? She's working the streets because her father is so poor and so drunk that he's got no money, so she's been forced to work the streets as a whore. So this is saying, hey, if you have a daughter, don't make her a whore, because what's going to happen is it's going to bring down everyone. It's going to turn the entire country into a land of whores, and the land will become immoral. Observe my Sabbaths, revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Fairly straightforward. So this one, when I was reading it, I read it kind of funny. It's because the translation here says, you shall not turn to brackets the sorcery of, close bracket, of or yidoni, right? So the exact sentence was, you shall not turn to of or yidoni, you shall not seek defile yourselves through them. And so basically whatever Ov and Yudoni are, and I recommend looking into these specifically, I will have to do so later, don't turn to their methods or don't turn to them, because by doing so, they're sorcery, right? So this must have been some kind of a people or a culture that used some sort of witchcraft or augury. Don't turn to their methods because you'll defile yourself. Rise before a venerable person, respect the elderly, fear your God, right? So the judge is entering, all rise before the honorable. Then respect the elderly is fairly straightforward. And then last in this trifecta, fear your God. So I think it's very significant that all three of these are told in sequence so we can elevate their significance, right? Starting with honor a venerable person, and then, or rise before them. Then when you get to the end, fear your God. All right, on to the fourth portion, chapter 19, chapter 33, or verse 33 rather. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not taunt him. The stranger who sojourns with you shall be as a native from among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. You shall not commit a perversion of justice with measures, weights, or liquid measures. You shall have true scales, true weights, a true ephah, and a true hin. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe all my statutes, all my ordinances, and fulfill them. I am the Lord. So this is the fourth portion in its entirety, only 5 verses, but very, very important when it comes to the treatment of a stranger, right? So a stranger sojourning in the land. Think of Abraham. When he did not own the land, he was just dwelling among them. Or even when the Hebrews went down to Goshen in Egypt, they were strangers sojourning in the land. They were foreigners. Do not taunt him. In other words, you think of like really cruel statements, like when people talk bad about a foreigner that moves into their country, that maybe they talk differently or they come from a different ethnicity, and then they start treating them poorly. So don't taunt the stranger. Next up, those who sojourn with you shall be as a native from among you. Love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I'm the Lord. So just right there again, we go back to the Egypt thing. Basically, don't forget to be humble, and also don't forget to love the new person as your neighbor. He's going to be as a native from among you, so love him equally. Perversion of justice with measures, weights, or liquid measures. So this one's really important to explain with context, tied into 36, having true scales, true weights, true ephah, and true hin. Right. So what this refers to in the old days. Well, we could use a contemporary example. Let's say that you're buying a lump of gold and you're going to weigh it out. Say, I want to buy 5 ounces of gold. So you go to the scale and you put it on the scale and you have 5 ounces, and then you look at the scale and the scale says that it's actually 6 ounces. Well, this is not a correct scale. This is not a true scale, right? It also says true weights and true measures and so on. So in the olden days, they would carry stones in their pocket. A merchant who was selling things by the pound would carry, or whatever the unit of measurement was, would carry stones with him that weighed a pound or 10 pounds or whatever. And then you would take that stone and you would put it on one side of the scale. And then you would take the thing that you were selling or buying and put it on the other side of the scale. And you'd say to the merchant, I'd like to buy 5 pounds of potatoes. So you get your 5-pound stone, you put it on one side, you get your 5 pounds of potatoes, you put it on the other side, and look at that, the scale is equal. That means it's 5 pounds. And so you've ever seen people weighing stuff out, like you go to the grocery store and you get cut cheese or whatever, and you go to the deli and they start weighing out the cheese. That's exactly what this is about. If that scale, right, and this is about fairness too, they talk about zeroing out the scale. In other words, before you measure on a scale today, you want to make sure that it equals 0. If you have a container that's going to sit on top of the scale, then you put on the container, then it's going to say the container weighs like 1.2 or whatever. Then you zero that out, so now it equals to 0. So everything you add afterward is the actual weight of the product and not just of the thing holding the product. That's another good example of keeping a true measure. So basically, where we hear you must use ephah of fine flour many times and a true hin. So these different weights, whether it's liquid, whether it's physical heavy matter, whether it's a measurement of an ephah, how do we measure an ephah? Well, now we know this has to follow the correct weight. And finally, a reminder, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe all my statutes and all my ordinances, and fulfill them. I am the Lord. A general reminder there. On to the fifth portion, chapter 20, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, And to the children of Israel you shall say, Any man of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Moloch, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall pelt him with stones. And I will set my attention upon that man, and I will cut him off from amidst his people, because he gave of his offspring to Molech in order to defile my holy ones and to profane my holy name. But if the people of the land ignore that man when he gives of his offspring to Molech, not putting him to death, I will set my attention upon that man and upon his family, and I will cut him off and all who stray after him to stray after Molech from amidst their people. And the person who turns to Ov or Yidoni to stray after them, I will set my attention upon that person, and I will cut him off from amidst his people. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. So, once again, considering the dangers of child sacrifice, well, it turns out, right, so this is an important distinction. Do not give your offspring to Molech. So we're basically talking about human sacrifice, child sacrifice, and not only if somebody does this, that's not only spiritually going to cut them off, but also they should be put to death by stoning. And anyone who does this or lets him get away with it, they're also going to be God's attention will turn upon them. Now we can interpret this, right? So it says giving your offspring to Moloch. So what is that really? Like, what does it mean? So we're talking about child sacrifice, but instead of it saying anyone who sacrifices a child, right? It's specifically referring to Molech. So I think this is an important distinction because we have also prior commandments that talk about how a person's child, when they're born, their firstborns, for example, they belong to God and they must be redeemed through through the holy temple and whatnot. So it's interesting to me that it's referring to putting children to death for the sake of Molech, offering up their child to Molech. And there we have it. There's something that's forbidden, but there are other gods that can be sacrificed to, right? But I think this is just a general understanding, especially in the local area. At that time, he may have been a competing deity, or simply referring to Molech, much like we talk about Azazel for the goat that was sent off with the burdens and the sins of the people. They're sent off to Azazel, right? But Azazel is not necessarily a person or a thing. It could be a place. You got to understand all of that together. Molech, similar situation. It's basically don't give child sacrifices, period. And then we also turn the person who turns to Ov or Yidoni to stray after them. I will set my attention upon that person. I will cut him off from amidst his people. So sacrificing children is a death penalty, but those who pursue these other things, and again, Ov and Yidoni, we know that we refer to a general blanket statement a lot of the time when it comes to the ways of those other people. But here, Ov and Yidoni, in the previous portion, it's specified their sorcery. So I think we can use these Molech and Ov and Yidoni to be stand-ins for the equivalent anywhere else. And when we think about Amalek, that also is why people would say, well, Amalek is still alive today because the spirit of Amalek is in those things. You could then say the same about the spirit of Molech, child sacrifice, is still a thing, so don't let that happen. And then the spirit of Ov and Yidoni, their practices of magic, similarly, don't turn to their methods either. So we refer to the people to represent a behavior. And I think that is the significance of using their names as a very good point of reference. And then, of course, sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Sixth portion, chapter 20, verse 8. And you shall observe my statutes and fulfill them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For any man who curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood is upon himself. And a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, committing adultery with the wife of his fellow, the adulterer, and the adulteress shall be put to death. Shall surely be put to death. And a man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed a depravity. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who lies with a male as one would with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who takes a woman and her mother, it is evil counsel. They shall burn him and them in fire, and there shall be no evil counsel in your midst. And a man who lies with an animal shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the animal. And a woman who comes close to any animal so that it will mate with her, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who takes his sister, whether his father's daughter or his mother's daughter, and he sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgraceful act, and they shall be cut off before the eyes of the members of their people. He uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his sin. And a man who lies with a woman who has a flow, and he uncovers her nakedness, he has bared her fountain, and she has uncovered her fountain of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from the midst of their people. And you shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister, for he would be bearing his close relative, they shall bear their sin. And a man who lies with his aunt, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness, they shall bear their transgression, they shall die childless. And a man who takes his brother's wife, it is a repulsive act, he has uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless. And you shall observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and fulfill them. Then the land to which I am bringing you to dwell therein will not vomit you out. So here we have first honor the father and mother, right? So for any who curses his parents, he'll be put to death. That's a death penalty. And it's his own fault. His blood's upon him for what he did. A man who commits adultery with another man's wife, that's no good. They're both put to death. Same deal, his father's wife or his uncle's wife or anyone, right? So if you lay with that person, you're uncovering their spouse's nakedness. This is very, very bad. A man lying with his daughter-in-law, that's depravity. They'll be put to death. A man who lies with another man, as they would a woman, that's considered an abomination. Also a death penalty. They brought it upon themselves. As this says, the blood is upon themselves. A man who takes a woman and her mother, it's evil counsel. So basically, he marries the daughter and the mother and puts them together. That's just not right. They burn them in fire. Okay, let's see next here. Man and animal, woman and animal, so that so a man can impose himself upon an animal, and a woman can attempt to have an animal impose itself upon her. This is a redundancy from a previous portion, right? So they'll be put to death. They brought it upon themselves, and so there you have it. Next up, a man who takes his sister. This one, it seems, is not a death penalty. Similarly, neither is one with a woman who's on her period, right? So a man who takes his sister and sees her nakedness, that's disgraceful. And a man who lies with a woman who has her flow. So both of these are considered to be not death penalties, but you do get cut off from the people. This is something that would probably need redemption, if that is even possible. A man who lies with the woman who has her flow, we just talked about that. Uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or father's sister, he'd be bearing his close relative, they shall bear their sin. A man who lies with his aunt uncovers the uncle, right? They die childless. A man who takes his brother's wife also will die childless. And lastly, observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and fulfill them, then the land to which I'm bringing you to dwell therein will not vomit you out. In other words, if you don't obey all these rules, we're going to have you kicked out. Interestingly, that the curse is not that they're going to be killed, but rather they're going to die childless. And it's interesting to me, how does that get carried out? Is this God saying, I'm going to make sure you don't have children? Well, it may be actually that we go into the previous subject, right? So maybe the child is born, but the child is not theirs. It's not recognized. They can't redeem the child because they're childless. Or maybe simply it's now impossible for them to have children according to God's spiritual power, which is also something we consider to be possible, that God basically says, nope, I'm not letting you have kids. Your reproductive abilities are non-existent. Poof. Such is the power of God who can do all the miracles that happened in Egypt. Chapter 20, the 7th portion, verse 23. You shall not follow the practices of the nation that I am sending away from before you, for they committed all these sins, and I was disgusted with them. So I said to you, you shall possess their land, and I shall give it to you to possess it, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has distinguished you from the peoples. And you shall distinguish between clean animals and unclean ones, and between unclean birds and clean ones. Thus you shall not make yourselves disgusting through unclean animals and birds and any creature which crawls on the earth, that I have distinguished for you to render unclean. And you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have distinguished you from the peoples to be mine. And a man or a woman who has the sorcery of or Yidoni shall surely be put to death. They shall pelt them with stones. Their blood is upon themselves. There we have it, the end of the 7th portion, nice and quick. So interestingly, right, we saw earlier, it's okay to have a stranger in your land, but definitely respect them, don't taunt them, and treat them as you would your neighbor. At the same time, we're also saying that the people here are arriving in a land where the people there are going to be cast out for breaking and all of these different commandments, that for disgusting the Lord, he's casting them out of the land and giving it to these people who are coming in to possess it, a land flowing with milk and honey. So basically, they had their chance, they blew it, you're coming in now to take over because I'm throwing them out, but you're going to be thrown out too if you don't follow my rules, so you better behave. Distinguishing between clean and unclean animals, right? We've been given the specifics on this one in previous portions. Don't forget to do it. Be holy for me. Be holy to me, for I am the Lord, am holy, and I've distinguished you from the peoples to be mine. Lastly, once again, reiterating on the sorcery matter, a man who has of Over Yudoni shall surely be put to death. They'll be pelt to death with stones, and again, they brought it upon themselves, right? Their blood is upon themselves. In other words, you brought it upon yourself. Thus concludes Kedoshim, a long list of very important things. For me, what really caught my eye was things related to the more mundane, things that you see happen all the time, right? Like someone paying somebody late, even when the money's there, but you're not paying your employees. Tisk, tisk, tisk. But also, I think a redundancy on forbidden relations really makes it clear how significant this is and how this is not permissible under many, many circumstances. The treatment of strangers, so very, very important. And I think is also in contemporary times, it's really important to remember this always. Very important. Fruit trees and all these different things we've talked about. There's just so much here. But of course, and also remembering, don't go and follow the ways of those other people, especially the ones that sacrifice children or commit witchcraft and sorcery. Don't do it. In any case, that's Kedoshim. Thank you for listening. This has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope we'll see you next time. Until then, Baruch Hashem.